So today, co-founder, story and strategy, out on your own with your business partner. Um, but I want to go back to the beginning. When did you start getting into this world, and what were your sort of foundations in storytelling?
Sure. The very first sort of light bulb moment, and this is going in the Wayback Machine, was Home Shopping Network, which not everyone may even know what that is, but at HSN, right out of college was my first job. And it was my first time seeing sort of commerce and storytelling, although in a blunt way, but still being used, and how those two worlds kind of worked with each other. And that was right when they started. Back then, they were doing infotainment, and there was this whole direction that was happening. And so that was my very first experience of, okay, this is interesting. There's a psychological element here. There's creative happening. There's objectives being met through the content. And so that was a very raw kind of intro into it. And then from there, just kept moving forward. Went to Fox Sports as a creative director. Loved sports marketing, completely different beast. Really enjoyed that time period. And then it was with a company called Remedy. They did a lot of original production for networks and launched their brand entertainment division. At the time, it wasn't even really a word that everybody was using, but I just really followed that trajectory of wanting to figure out how to work with brands and being the best possible storytellers that they can be. And it just kind of kept growing as I kept sort of going along this trajectory too. So
Why that sort of juxtaposition of brand and story? Like, what was it about those two forces that you were like, I really like where these play?
I think because it's so challenging, you need to have, not only is the bar set at an excellent story, but the bar is also set at having to meet certain objectives for the brand as well. So just a great story alone is like table stakes, which is really challenging just to get that part right. And then on top of it, it has to also meet all these other criteria in order in my opinion, to qualify as really good brand funded entertainment. If it doesn't, then it's just entertainment. But brand funded entertainment to me is the two sides of that coin. When it's hitting on both of those pieces, it is extremely challenging and difficult to do, which is kind of the fun part. But when it hits, it's a really, really good feeling when you see all that actually hitting and uniting and everything working together. And I think that was the challenge, is really what the turn on was.
So you launched the brand entertainment division. What are the kinds of projects you're doing at that time? Like, who are the brands playing in that space, and how are you helping them navigate into this world?
That was pretty early on back in the Remedy days, but we were working with Disney and we were working with National Geographic and Discovery. And so we were doing a lot of side projects. So along with the original programming, then we would come in and figure out these ancillary pieces and parts for their sponsors. Disney we worked one-on-one with creating storytelling for particularly their parks division as well. And again, this was at a time period when branded entertainment really still wasn't a thing yet. And so we were figuring it out, building the plane as we're going along. Right after, a little bit after that time period, I would probably say about 7 or 8 years in that role, Marriott, about 2015, 2014, started to put together the pieces and parts of launching their own entertainment studio and brand studio. And that immediately was another light bulb moment of, okay, this is a travel company now that is also jumping into this space in a really bold way. And that was a buy-in from the CEO to the CMO, the whole deal. And that was sort of an opportunity you couldn't pass up. You know, when I went up there and we were talking about it, my main number one question was, is this just going to be a one-year experiment because I'm going to have to move up here and uproot my life? Or is this going to really be bought in by leadership, and this is a new innovative way of going to market as a company as whole? And it was, hands down, it was very clear to me that this is something that is bought in, and the company was going to go full force into storytelling and build out a COE basically of storytelling for the company and all 30 brands.
When you're building the story foundation for a brand like that, like, what are the conversations you're having internally around storytelling and metrics and how you're going to evaluate this sort of new entity?
I think it was a case by case basis. Every case was completely custom. Um, I know that there's always the silver bullet answer. Everyone wants, like, hey, we're always going to measure it like this, and this is exactly how we're going to do it. I think because the objectives were so different in certain cases, one core objective, and this was clearly a vanity objective, but it was an objective, was we wanted the entertainment community to take this endeavor seriously. And so that was an objective. So that included, how are we going to get positive PR? How are we going to partner with the right folks, in which the entertainment community will know, like, hey, okay, Marriott's serious about, this studio. It's not just they're slapping the word studio on something, but they're actually going in and doing this work at a producer type mindset and level. So that was one metric, was the foundation of the studio itself. The other metrics were obviously then the brand metrics of the company itself, the business objectives. All that had to ladder up into an upper level that basically, depending on the project we were doing, it was very clear at that time, okay, what are the metrics of this one? And the next project, they might be completely different because we have a completely different mission. And then same thing with the brand. When you work for a large portfolio company, each single brand also brings their own element into it and their own lens. So that was a really fun and challenging piece of the pie, was, okay, how do we layer that into all this as well and still keep it focused that it's not content, it's entertainment.
What opportunity, from your perspective, do brands have to play in this space, right? Like Marriott's got properties all over the world. There's travel stories, there's stories of people, there's stories of culture. Like, it becomes a ripe opportunity to explore this. But when you look at the industry as a whole, why do you think more brands should be playing in this world?
I mean, we could probably have another 2-hour session about the why behind why I believe it. I think the top answers are, obviously, I think this is where audiences are going. There's the obvious answers. There's the culture side of it, that if you want to tap into culture, be relevant in culture, that storytelling and entertainment is the number one way to be able to do that. There's obviously then just straight out eyeballs itself of how fragmented media is right now, and how it's important now for brands to start building their own audiences, building their own IP, thinking about themselves as a media company, in essence. I think there's certain companies that can do that really well. They have the ability, certain brands have the ability to do that better than other brands. But from the angle of why other brands should do this, whether you're a small, big, or large brand, part of the conversation I have now is all different size companies. And I always say to any brand that is wanting to express themselves through storytelling is that every company has an origin story. There's that part of it too. And I think sometimes the origin story is the best secret weapon, that a company might have. It's ownable. No one else can own that, origin story, especially when a brand or company is looking to differentiate themselves. That's a huge differentiator. So I think there's a lot of pieces and parts and elements that make storytelling, for me, so important going forward for brands. But you start to add that all up, and it's just moving so fast in that direction of being appealing to audiences. I'll say the word authentic, it's so overused. But then also being able to economies of scale too. I mean, there's the piece of when we used to talk about the documentary storytelling or the approach or the character-driven stories we were doing, they're evergreen. And that's a huge, especially when you're sitting there talking about dollars and cents and efficiencies and building out franchises and having a serial mindset to things. Can't really do that with marketing and advertising. Only so many times you can take that content off the shelf and keep using it or repackaging it. With storytelling, it truly is evergreen, and you can really build those out in a way that it's kind of the gift that keeps giving from an efficiency standpoint as well.
So you get inside to Marriott, start building out this storytelling and brand storytelling studio. How does that evolve, and how do you refine the storytelling as you start to understand both the brand side and the audiences more?
I think there was a couple parts to it that were sort of the through line. One part was this was about travel being inspiration, um, and that was key. So every story we told had to have a lens of inspirational travel, good travel, what travel does to you, how it changes you. There was a huge emphasis on that. Um, so there was that lens component of these are the type of stories we're going to tell, and this is why. It was not the heads and beds team. This was clearly about inspiring you to go somewhere, and then also telling that story of change and transformation. So that was a key filter applying. I think the other part of it was using this arm for innovative distribution and even experimentation. We looked at all different ways of distributing. We looked at all different formats of using. We experimented with a lot of different things, and I think that was a really fun time period. To see what worked, what didn't work, and then starting to develop what I would call a slate. Really thinking about it from a producer mindset of let's not just do one and dones. Let's get out of the one and done business, and let's actually start approaching this with a franchise mindset so we can start building audiences, owning our own IP, and growing this over time. So if we are investing, we're investing in things that are already growing in there. We're not trying to create 90 new things. There was a method to the madness of how do we simplify this and streamline it and make it somewhat predictable, so we're not adding new ideas on top of new ideas, but franchises that can easily ladder up to the brand objectives, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time that we're going through a repositioning.
Is there a Marriott project that really sticks out to you from your time there where you're like, that story, the way we planned it, the objectives we had, like it knocked it out of the park?
For me, it's the storybook series because it was a 3-year endeavor, which is decades in a career world of doing that type of content. Anytime you have a 3-year runway, is huge. We were able to approach it very cinematically, character first. We put a lot of craft and pride into finding the folks we wanted to tell the stories of, the why behind it. And then again, it was that building out a franchise and building out an audience and using that as a flexible vehicle that we could ladder that to anything that was happening in the company. So if there was an experiential element to that we would match that with our tent poles throughout the year. We had a huge loyalty component to it that was interconnected to it. CSR, PR, it was basically building the wheel around that to where that series fed all the needs that we needed from it, and hence why we were able to fund that for 3 years going and 12, 13 episodes later. And I still, to this day, I get emails still about when I talk to someone or I tell them my background, they tell me about, hey, I missed my business meeting because I sat in a hotel room and I watched this show about this person in Korea and they were a chef, and I watched this one, and so it brings a big smile to my face that, okay, this was sort of the really first direction at building out story-driven entertainment that was lean back type style entertainment that really on a deep emotional level connected with people. I have the emails to kind of prove that deep, really deep connection with folks that fell in love with these stories and characters. And that, at the end of the day, scrape everything away. That's the entire point, is to fall in love and have a deep, deep connection to the brand through these stories.
So when did you transition out of Marriott and put together Story and Strategy?
So right around post-COVID time, the world was upside down for everybody. And for me at that time, I think I was 6, 7 years at Marriott, and during that time period, we were having a lot of prior to that, we were having a lot of conversations with different brands that would come in and companies, and they would sit and they would say, hey, walk us through how you guys are doing this. And after you did it a few times, the light bulb kind of went on of like, oh, okay, there's something that we're doing that outside these four walls is valuable to other companies and brands. Of how do you build something like this, a storytelling COE and a giant global matrix organization? And so took all those inherent learnings and mistakes and everything that you make over 7 years, and really went out to consult brands, particularly in the niche of connecting brand objectives to really good quality storytelling. I mean, that was kind of the gist at the end of the day. It was like, we've been on the brand side. I understand and have a lot of empathy for what brand leaders go through. And so the thought process really was, and the impetus was, how do we take brand objectives and business objectives and match that with really good quality storytelling and bridge that gap that we were still seeing out in the marketplace, that there was still a gigantic gap between those two worlds. So
When you look at where the industry is today, and Brian and I talked about this a little bit previously, was that like a lot of times when you look at the brand storytelling world, there's these unicorns like Patagonia and REI that can be really intimidating if you haven't been in this space before. What advice do you have for brands that are thinking about exploring storytelling or wanting to build something like this out and they don't know where to start?
so this is something we learned when you start your own consultancy. You probably reposition yourself 10 times over, because as you talk to more and more people, you realize what the needs are. It was clear to us education was the number one need out there. It wasn't pitch me great ideas. It wasn't bring in 900 ideas. It was literally, let's sit down and start with the why of what are we doing this for? Why are we doing this? And truly educating on what is brand storytelling and avoiding jumping into the deep end. Looking at the company, getting to know the company, doing a 3-month sit down with different departments and teams within these companies, and literally talk about storytelling again as a circle of excellence for the whole organization, not just marketing, but PR, social, CSR. How's it all going to work together? And the idea, sort of when that was coming to fruition and how we were seeing that play out, was the fact that whether or not it's small, big, or large storytelling, it was all about getting everyone on the same page from the very get-go of why are we doing this. It's amazing that some of these companies, even years into it, you'll walk around the hallways and there's still departments that say, I have no idea why we're doing this. Well, the company's been doing it for 5 years. Like, that's a problem. Like, so this was really an opportunity that we saw of like, hey, let's turn on the education lens first. And we're kind of like Switzerland. We're not an agency. We're not coming in and we're not a production company. We're not pitching tons of ideas. It really is about education and thought leadership and sitting down and getting that trust built first and foremost, and then the buy-in, and also the honesty of like, hey, the infrastructure may not exist here to do this right now, and that's okay too. That's all part of the learning process. Or, hey, we now have the why, we now have the trust. Now let's talk about how are we going to take this to the next level? Like, let's figure out the projects that would make sense, and then it's let's go out and find the right partners, that can bring certain things to life of what you guys need. But I just get back to education as being, I personally believe, the number one key right now in this industry, is that education on both sides of the table. That's really needed.
In a world where, CMO turnover is high, revenue keeps getting, or not revenue, but like marketing budgets keep getting cut and pulling from different bits and pieces, storytelling often is, a 2 or a 3 or a 5 year play. It doesn't have the results that maybe a quarterly performance marketing campaign might have. What do you want to see more brands doing, and how do you get them to think more long term about a storytelling strategy?
I think there's a couple of points there. One is, not everything has to be the 8 or 12-month approach either. Some there's a theory of crawl before you walk approach as well, and that's part of that education process of let's bite off what makes sense right now and then start to prove it out, and then start to grow these into much maybe larger or bigger endeavors. And I think so many brands and companies start off in the deep end. They jump right in on a major project. They probably didn't, not everyone around the table maybe did the upfront work of, hey, is this something that everyone's on board with? Does this make a ton of sense? Do we have, again, the bandwidth, the infrastructure to do something like this and to dedicate time to it so it isn't a one and done? So I think there's nothing wrong with saying start off small and then build that up as proof of concept happens. Typically, most of the most successful storytelling operations probably started that way, with companies and leaders. And then I think the other component is on the measurement piece and on the instant gratification piece, which is always going to be part of the conversation because of the tenure of leadership. You want that instant gratification. 8-10 months of a project is a lifetime in a leadership tenure. There's ways to build those components around the story. So there is ways to build certain elements, pieces, and parts that don't have to necessarily be in the story, that are much faster, much easier to measure, and much more tactical, in that sense, that can achieve that sort of instant measurement gratification need, as well as then you're working on the marathon over here. So
We kind of talked about it a little bit before, but one of the things I've seen a lot is like brands wanting to do too much inside of one story. We want to make a story, we wanted to solve these 5 business objectives, but it's a bit of you say too much, you don't really say anything at all. You mentioned it briefly before, but that idea of like, how do you think about the assets that go around a story to build out a campaign in a really intentional way, but that doesn't necessarily sacrifice the quality of the story for the sake of having those pieces?
yeah, I mean, I've always looked at it as it's basically just a giant wagon wheel, and I know from my days in corporate, you couldn't just walk in the room and say, hey, this is the series we're going to do, or this is the idea we're going to do. I had to build an entire plan around that. And when I say plan, I mean, what is going to get PR excited about this? What's the PR? How do they have ownership of a piece of this and an element? What's the social component? What is the CSR component? What are the business objectives this year that's earning the company? And how is this project going to ladder to those business objectives? The experiential piece of this, is it something that we could tap into our loyalty members for to add value there? Partnership piece. It's one of those things that if you're going to set the table, you're setting all these pieces and parts around the main course, and you're adding value to every department within the company. That's how you start to really build the foundation of a storytelling COE, because then it's just not a marketing function anymore. All the different entities in the matrix of the organization are benefiting from these projects getting done. I think that was kind of the light bulb moment, was when we started to understand if we can build this to where everyone is benefiting in the corporation and the company, then this doesn't become a why are we doing this? It becomes why are we not doing more of this? And everyone is involved around the table. Easier said than done, but that was the model going in all the time. And then you keep the story 100% pure. The story itself stays completely pure, and everything else is built around this.
What are you excited about for the next 2, 3, 5 years in this space?
That's a good question. I think we're in a better place than we've been, which is good. I see much more appetite out there now for really good quality brand storytelling. Audiences they've gone from accepting it to now absolutely. They will take in really good stories from brands. So I think all the fundamentals have grown in a very positive direction, that this will continue to become much more important, much more part of the overall plan. It's never going to be the entire plan, and I don't think it needs to be. I think it's always going to be another great piece and part of the strategy. But I think from a future focus, I see better quality storytelling and better character-driven stories that are becoming much more important to brands, and much more understanding that these are direct connects to their values, and these are direct connects to what their audiences and consumers really want to see and connect with. And that there's now, because it's been going on long enough, there's some really good information and case studies out there now that are starting to form that shows how that, turning these consumers into brand fans for life is actually now starting to really come true. So there's that component to it. I think then there's always the AI piece of this as well, which is just part of the conversation. I think with that happening, I can't help but predict that is definitely going to have a flooding to the market effect. There's going to be a lot more stuff now that is going to be hitting the area as well that might not be traditional storytelling. So I think it's going to be a little bit of a mixed bag. I think there's going to be a lot more to fish through out there because of AI. And I hope that the quality still rises to the top. And when I say quality, it's not just aesthetics, but as a brand, background and a marketer at heart, when I say quality, I mean also really effective brand storytelling. Brand storytelling that made you connect on an emotional level to that brand, and the story was as beautiful and cinematic as well. And so I think that still has to be the mission going forward.
Amazing. Before I let you go, I've got my 5 rapid fire, not so rapid fire
Nice.
questions. First, what's a story that's had an impact on you and why?
I would have to say Casablanca, just because, and it's a weird answer, I know, but it was the film I did my thesis on when I went to film school. So I buried myself in that film, and I learned every element and aspect. And it's a great film, for people to go back and watch again. But it had so many on and off camera nuance to it at the time period of when it was filmed, and the actors, that it had such an impact on me of how these folks on camera were not even really acting. It really was a great story of the story with Casablanca. And so anytime I see a poster of that, or I see a clip of it somewhere, I immediately have an emotional, connection to that, just because of all the pieces and parts that went into just making that film that I learned over the years.
Amazing. It kind of cheats my second question, which is what's one film that you think everyone should watch?
So I have a different answer for that,
Perfect.
because not everybody's a Casablanca fan, or is going to go back to the old black and whites. But I think Walter Mitty is a great film. I was just thinking about this the other day. I don't know why I connect with that film, but I just really, and it's a little bit obscure. A lot of people don't, know that film maybe, but it to me, it's just such a classic story, and is both a little bit fantasy and a little bit reality, and has just such a great human journey story to it. That's one of those films that stuck with me for a long time after I watched it.
It's amazing. What's something you never leave home without?
Oh man, the obvious is your phone. That's a very boring answer. But my hat. I typically always grab a hat because this burns really easily in Florida. So even if it's cloudy out, I will grab my hat, anticipating if the sun comes or not. So safety first.
What's an important place for you to go to find inspiration?
The water. I go out on the water to find inspiration. I've lived in a lot of different places, and I always have tried to find places where there's at least some type of body of water nearby, even if it's just a lake or stream, or I prefer the ocean. But for me, it's always been something happens when I get on the water or smell the salt water. It's just an instant pick me up, and clears the mind. And it can be for 5 minutes, it can be for 2 hours, but always come back feeling completely recharged and ready. So
Amazing. What's the most important skill for a storyteller to develop?
Important skill, first, curiosity. I think curiosity is huge. I think anytime you're telling the stories of other people, companies, brands, there's a gigantic trust there, and there has to be a curiosity on the other side of the table. That I always say, you have conversations with people and they're like, well, yeah, but you guys don't know anything about this business or this industry, and I think that's actually the best position sometimes to come in, and because you come in and you have to have a really dying thirst of curiosity and sit down and kind of learn and ask all the dumb questions and really peel back the layers and dig in. And I think some of the best work I've seen from some of the storytellers that I respect the most are some of the most insane curious people I've ever met, to the point where it's almost borderline annoying, but they just will look at something and just want to know every single piece and part about it and ask 80 questions. And it is such a value add, when you bring that to the table and you can put that into the work.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Mark.
Yeah, good times. Thanks.